uh, keep people's videos off so that we just focus on the speaker. But Dr. Vrain is a retired soil biologist and genetic engineer who spent his research career with the Department of Agriculture in Canada. He was the head of a research group of 40 professionals in biotechnology, the vice president and president of national and international associations of soil biologists, and an associate editor of several scientific journals in Europe and the USA. He has spoken publicly about the current excesses of chemical agriculture, particularly antibiotic contamination of engineered crops and food. He lives on Vancouver Island on the west coast of Canada, and he spoke to our group back in, I think, 2017, something like that, at Evanston Township High School. And so we're thrilled to have him back now. So that's it for me. And then we should stop share and let you share, Dr. Vrain.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Okay. All right, you should all see this.
Yes, it looks perfect.
Right. Okay, so as you heard in the introduction, I'm going to basically focus on glyphosate, the effect of glyphosate on human health, but you can extend that to the rest of nature, of course. So glyphosate is the active ingredient in the herbicide Roundup, and Roundup is widely used everywhere on the planet, really, not just in the US, it's in Canada, everywhere. It's the best herbicide we have ever had, which explains its success and which explains the pressure from the agriculture, from farmers who use it on basically on the EPA and other administrative bodies that would normally regulate it. It is regulated and it's extremely studied. There's like thousands of studies that have been done on this chemical. So what is it? I'm going to spend a few minutes explaining. It basically appears in 1950 in the record as an amino acid analog, a synthetic amino acid, but nobody seems to know what to do with it. So it's basically left on the shelf for a number of years. It shows up in 1964. There's a patent for it as a demineralizer. It's a small molecule. You can see it here on the top of my slide on the right side. It's a tiny molecule. It's very small. And it basically binds to many different kinds of metals, some of them harder than others. And so it's very useful to clean up pipes that have been in boilers, etc., etc. I was told earlier that I only have an hour, so I need to speed up. In 1969, it is discovered as a herbicide. When you use it as a demineralizer in a boiler, and you dump your solution, your cleaning solution into nature, you realize instantly that it's killing all plants and trees. And somebody must have noticed that, and there's definitely money to be made with a good herbicide. And it works apparently. Hang on, I need to get rid of that. Okay. And this goes here. It works apparently on a biochemical pathway called the shikimic pathway, and which ends basically to make three amino acids which are essential to make proteins. So if you can't make these essential amino acids because the molecule glyphosate is interfering with the pathway, you're in trouble. You're dead, and that's what happens. It's an excellent herbicide because it kills all plants, and that is no other herbicide can match that. The herbicide was discovered by Monsanto. They did all kinds of studies, of course, and it took them until 1974 to get a license to market it and to commercialize it, and they commercialize it under the name Roundup. The herbicide name is Roundup. The active ingredient is glyphosate. And you can see at the bottom here that this shikimic acid pathway that is presumed to be the effective way that the plants are dying is also used by bacteria and fungi and many other unicellular organisms in nature to make their proteins. Animals, because animals compared to bacteria, plants, and fungi are really, which function by making all kinds of molecules. Animals are very, I often say they're biochemical dwarfs. We don't make that many molecules at all. We don't use them. Animals do not have that pathway. We need to get those amino acids from our food, like many others. You know that half of the amino acids that are in our bodies we need from our food. And so this is a herbicide, and it is extremely successful. It is used everywhere. It is used intensely as a herbicide. It's perfect. And this is a video clip of from Germany explaining. Oops.
In the Magdeburg region, Peter Gottschalk manages a modern multi-family farm with 34 employees on 3,500 hectares. Sustainable agriculture is important to the large operation. To minimize the erosion caused by plowing, they've used glyphosate-containing herbicides for 20 years. The remaining chemically killed plants prevent the topsoil from being eroded by water and wind.
If we had done another tillage, we would have worked the straw more into the soil, which would have sped up the decomposing process. To prevent this, for erosion protection reasons, we've used glyphosate. This way, all the unwanted plants die off. The bits of green that you can still see are barley grains that spilled over and sprouted after our treatment.
Spraying glyphosate before seeding kills the competing and infected plants. Traditionally, this was achieved through laborious plowing. 2 weeks after the glyphosate treatment, the field is clean enough to strip till. This protects against erosion, saves time, fuel, and machine costs. While making use of the benefits, Gottschalk tries to use as little glyphosate as possible with the support of computers.
This represents our mixture of water and glyphosate. This shows that we are using 2.5 liters of glyphosate per hectare, which is about half of the permitted amount.
Glyphosate is the best herbicide. It is used everywhere. Yeah, so much so that basically the farmers using it don't have to plow. And that's really important for the life of the soil. So that's a great improvement, not plowing, as you can see here in the video. So really, this is a really useful and important herbicide. So it's used as a herbicide for so many years, but in 1996, Monsanto invented GMOs. They didn't invent GMOs, of course, but they invented the most spectacularly successful collection of Roundup ready crops. Roundup ready crops are engineered with a bacterial gene to make the crops, the plants, tolerant to the application of the herbicide. Now you have to appreciate that this herbicide, and we'll look at that in a minute, is also antibiotic. It kills bacteria and plants with the same biochemistry as I explained earlier. So if you expose bacteria to this chemical, eventually you're going to get some of them that are developing resistance to the herbicide. And if you have the labs and the facilities to isolate the gene for antibiotic resistance from that bacteria, you can engineer it in the plant, and the plant will become resistant to the antibiotic slash herbicide. And this is how it's done. And when I have 2 hours, but I was told I only have one, so I won't spend too much time on that. But I explain what GMOs are, how they're made, and basically the most successful kind of GMOs are the ones at the bottom: resistance to the herbicide, resistant to Roundup. And so you have now a collection of crops, not that big, not that many, definitely under a dozen, but they're all the biggest crops in the US and Canada. And you have Roundup Ready soybean, corn, canola. So these plants can be sprayed with the herbicide. If you spray a herbicide on a plant, you kill it. That's the definition of a herbicide. But if you spray Roundup on crops that have been engineered to be resistant to the antibiotic slash herbicide, then the plants continue to grow. And so you can plant your seeds as a farmer. You plant your seeds, and the seeds come up, and the weeds come up, and 2 or 3 weeks later, you have, or a month later, you have the weeds just as high as your crop, and you apply your herbicide, and you kill all your weeds, and you can do that again in a month or two if the weeds come back. And it's the farmers think this is a fantastic technology. In 2000, there is a new way of using this chemical. It doesn't need to be patented. It's perfectly okay to use it as a chemical ripening agent. And that's really important because when you are a farmer in northern Saskatchewan or northern USA and somewhere, and your crop of wheat or soybean or whatever else, grains, peas, beans, etc., is seeds like canola, is not quite ripe yet. And you can see that the weather is going to turn. It's the end of the summer and you don't have enough time, or perhaps it's not convenient. So just for convenience, just to make sure that your whole field is ripe, you spray it with Roundup, with glyphosate. And because the plants are not engineered, they will die and dry up. And so this chemical is now used, sprayed on those crops 1 week before harvest to kill them and dry them, so that when you harvest a week later, the grain is dry and you have much less moisture and much less trouble with molds. It's a very successful, and basically it has become normal and routine for the farmers to spray the grains and the seeds just before harvest. And as I explained, that's chemical ripening of wheat, oat, barley, all the grains, buckwheat, millet, sorghum, sunflowers, flax, peanuts, peas, lentils, chickpeas, beans, sugarcane, and many others, potatoes sometime, are sprayed before harvest so the greens are dried up and the grain is dried up and there's less moisture and much less problems with mold. Now, I didn't talk about residues in the food, from using it as a herbicide to using it on GMO crops to using it as a chemical ripening agent. But you can imagine that if you spray just before harvest, you might as well spray your food on your plate. There's no difference. So the gluten intolerance and celiac epidemic that we've seen developing in the last 30 years, it's pretty convincing that it comes from this antibiotic slash herbicide. And if you look down at the picture down there, where it's a pretty much normal lunch for many people, you got French fries from GMO canola oil, you got corn syrup in your soda, you have a wheat bun desiccated with Roundup with very high residues, you have soy protein from GMO soy, of course, and the cheese comes from cows, from milk, cows fed GMO corn and soy. So you can see that the residues in this lunch would be very high. Okay, and finally, in 2010 or so, there is a patent for glyphosate as an anti-parasitic agent from Monsanto. Monsanto, this is a Google patent. You can Google the patent and find it. They were hoping, I mean, obviously this antibiotic is working really well on malaria agent, and they were hoping, they patented it so that they were hoping to make it as a pharmaceutical molecule for malaria, which of course, you know, is killing millions of people every year. So you can read the patent, and if you read the patent, the background of invention, it says here, the Shikimate pathway is in bacteria, algae, fungi, and plants, but not in animals. Therefore, it should be safe to take it. But if you read further in the abstract, there's a list of susceptible organisms, and it includes, but not limited to, basically all bacteria. All bacteria make their proteins, their amino acid the same way, and they are killed. This antiparasitic molecule is not just antiparasitic, it is also antibiotic. And you can see that in the patent, basically you need 1 to 2 milligram per kilo of body weight to have it active as an antiparasitic, as an anti-malaria agent. And the US has an acceptable daily intake, which I think is 1.7 milligram per kilo of body weight, or somewhere like that. But basically in the range of what you would take as an anti-malaria agent. Okay, I have to speed up. So basically, you all know that the more antibiotics we use, the faster bacteria develop resistance. So we use a huge amount in medicine, way more than necessary, hundreds of tons for medicine. But we also use antibiotic to fatten our animals. That's very normal, very current. And we use thousands of tons to do that. And we use millions of tons for weed control if you know that glyphosate is antibiotic.
Back here now, chemicals used in common weed killers could be contributing to the problem of antibiotic resistance. This according to researchers at Canterbury University. Their study released today could have implications worldwide because of the rise of superbugs, for which there are no effective drugs. Jess Cartwright explains.
In the battle with weeds, chemical sprays have long been the weapon of choice. But now there's evidence some of the chemicals in them could be putting human health at risk on a global scale.
If you look at how different commercial chemical products are regulated, almost never is there an assessment on the sublethal effects of these products, particularly on microorganisms.
Groundbreaking research by Canterbury University's discovered some chemicals used in herbicides are playing a role in making bacteria resistant to antibiotics.
Okay, so that basically ties up into the story of the microbiome. And I normally spend a lot of time explaining what the microbiome is. It's basically this has become very mainstream in the last few years. We discovered in the last 50 years that we have an organ, a super organ in our belly, the colon, which holds communities of next to many hundreds of different kinds of bacteria, which basically talk to each other using chemical languages with, small chain fatty acids, etc., butyric acid and others. And they basically talk to all our organs that way. You're not in charge of your organs. You have nothing to do with your liver or your immune system. The food that you put in your mouth has everything to do with the bacteria in your colon who are in charge of your organs. You can see at the bottom here there's a brain and an arrow saying behavior. It has to do with the neurotransmitters that are in your brain, which are all manufactured in your microbiome, and etc. The immune system is completely the students of the bacteria in the microbiome. And we have realized, and I used to show a video, but we don't have time for that, that basically all the troubles here that you see, what you're familiar with, diabetes, eczema, obesity, diarrhea, Crohn's disease, arthritis, autism, colitis, did I say that already? Asthma, obesity are all linked to disturbed gut flora. Animals do not have the shikimic acid pathway, but all their symbionts do. And that means that basically all animals, including the bees and the birds and the frogs, all have a microbiome, and they're all susceptible to antibiotic in the environment. I'm going to go rapidly here to show you a series of studies that I cite, et cetera, et cetera. You can see that frogs can die quickly. EPA has an MRL, a maximum residual limit in water for humans at 0.7 milligram per kilo of body weight, parts per million. And it says on their website that, or at least it used to, that if you drink water at 0.7 or above, you're going to get liver and kidney damage. Okay, very quickly here, this is a recent study. Why am I showing? Okay, a recent, sorry. And this is using basically metagenomic, that means, using the genome of all the bacteria in fecal samples. They were able to show that basically feeding mice water that has the equivalent of the acceptable daily intake for humans, and they ended up with serious problems and inflammation, etc., etc. 1 parts per million of glyphosate in the feed kills bacillus, bifidobacteria, etc., but not salmonella and clostridia. And that's really interesting because we do get salmonella problems, and clostridia also, Clostridium botulinum, which is botulism. And this study here shows that glyphosate suppresses bacteria that suppress antagonistic to botulism. This is from Germany. And I also found this graph here on the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. They have this graph, and this is infant botulism. The green line is mine. The blue line is serious data showing an increase in botulism in the last 20 years. This is a study done by 2 people that I know well. and corresponded with. And it basically says that glyphosate is, causes basically celiac. The celiac is always associated to a damaged microbiome and is fully explained by the known properties of glyphosate. Glyphosate inactivates CYP enzymes. We have about 57 of those enzymes, most of them in the liver. They are basically there to detoxify anything that you put in your mouth. And of course, glyphosate inactivates them. Therefore, you basically become toxified in your liver. Another study showing that glyphosate, because of its antibiotic properties, causes inflammation, oxidative stress, and all kinds of chronic diseases that have become epidemic in the last 30 years since the use of glyphosate on GMOs. A few more: glyphosate, an endocrine disruptor at 0.5 parts per million. 1 part per million reduced testosterone in rats. This is a scandal study that was done in France that was published in 2012. Excuse me. The Monsanto wanted to have their herbicide in France, and they needed to do a toxicology study, and so they used rats that are prone to cancer. It's called a Dewey strain. It's very common, it's normal, used in the lab. And they did a 3-month study and basically fed the rats GMO corn that had been sprayed, of course, and so not soy, GMO corn, I think. And basically after 3 months, they did their analysis and the rats were healthy and nothing showed up. And one French researcher doubted their results and he had to go through administrative headaches to get the study results from Monsanto, and did another kind of analysis that showed that there was some possible damage brewing up at 3 months. And so this scientist in France assembled a team of toxicologists and got funding for $3 million to do a 2-year study on the same rats with the same GMO corn and the same dosage and everything pretty much the same. And after 4 months, it was pretty obvious that they did analysis of the rats every week. They took samples of urine and blood and et cetera, et cetera. And it was pretty obvious after 4 months that there was trouble and damage in the liver and the kidneys. And after a few more months, there were tumors that appeared, breast tumors. And they let the experiment run its course to all 2 years. And after 2 years, of course, they published their results. And with the pictures, you can see these enormous breast cancer tumors. And the reaction from Monsanto and many scientists was, this is outrageous. You should, I mean, and also we looked at your data and how you did your statistical analysis, and you don't know what you're doing. And this is absolutely wrong, and it's cruel, and it's horrible. And they pressured the publisher to retract the study, and the publisher said, but it was peer reviewed by many people, and it's completely acceptable, and we do not retract. And 1 year later, the publishing house put a new editor on that journal responsible for biotechnology. And this editor assembled a new team of researchers, of scientists, to re-evaluate the paper. And they came up with a diagnosis that really the results were inconclusive. And so the editor basically retracted the paper, and it was taken off the record. The scientists responsible submitted it to a new journal who had a new peer review process, and the paper was republished a year later in a different journal, and it is available, and the French people stand by their results. A few more. You can see a lot of oxidation, a lot of oxidative stress in rats with liver and kidney, et cetera. Cancer cell proliferation is accelerated. Two more titles that I picked up somewhere. Really, it's so much that basically by 2015, the World Health Organization, that you all have heard so much about because of COVID, declares that glyphosate is a probable human carcinogen. In 2017, the EPA in the USA declares glyphosate is not a human carcinogen, with intense pressure, of course, from the farming community and Monsanto. But in the brouhaha that came with this scandal, it was interesting to see that in 1985, excuse me for a second here, in 1985, the EPA had already classified glyphosate as a human carcinogen. But that was taken off the record in 1991 by the EPA because Monsanto had their vice president delegation and basically ordered the reverse of the classification to non-carcinogenic. So there's an interesting story here. And I'm going to give you a little 1 minute clip here from Professor Portier, who was one of the 17 toxicologists in 11 countries that were assembled as a team that year by the EPA. They do that every year. And they ask those toxicologists to come up with a diagnosis for quite a few molecules. And glyphosate was one of them, and of course Roundup. And the toxicologists basically reviewed the hundreds and maybe even thousands of studies that had been done on this chemical.
In cancer, we have what we call the 10 key characteristics of human carcinogenesis. And these are the 10 key things that we believe chemicals and environmental factors and agents in the environment do to start the cancer process. So oxidative stress is a potential precursor for cancer, and seeing study after study where glyphosate induces oxidative stress suggests that that could strengthen the overall cancer finding.
All of the evidence is rejected by BFR. Chris Portier encountered a similar neglect in the USA.
EPA reviewed the same animal evidence as us, initially concluding there was evidence of carcinogenicity from that animal evidence. They presented that finding to their science advisory panel, which is an outside panel of scientists, who then felt that that was too strong of a statement and wanted the EPA to reevaluate it again. And in the end, EPA chose to discard those studies as being not relevant and listed as suggestive of no evidence of cancer, which we would definitely, I personally would very much disagree on.
In reality, the BFR assessment had been pre-formulated by the glyphosate task force of the industry. The BFR simply shortened or added comments in italics. Critical studies get rated as not reliable.
Okay. I'm going to show you here. This is a very interesting study that was done published in 2014. And Nancy Swanson came all the way from the US to see me sometime afterwards. And she's in hiding, or she was in hiding at the time, because this was such an incredible study. What she did here is basically she took data from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. If you have cancer or some sort of illness that you see your doctor about, you become a statistics, and the Center for Disease Control knows how many people got cancer of any kind in this particular year and the next year, et cetera, et cetera. And she also took the data from the Ministry of Agriculture, Department of Agriculture, showing how much glyphosate or how much Roundup had been used this particular year on soybean, only for this crop. And she put the two sets of data together and she did a correlation analysis. So a correlation analysis basically looks at the data of the two sets of data and decides how closely related they are. And if they are incredibly related and basically they come together, then you get a correlation factor of 1 or 0.99. Yeah, like this. Basically, it's obvious. 0.95 is still extremely high. 0.9, and then as you go down, like 0.2, 0.5, well, no, you can't really tell whether the two come together. And so that's what she did. And so the U.S. Center for Disease Control basically gave her the yellow bars as the number of people having this particular disease that particular year. And then the US Department of Agriculture gave her the red curve, which is the use of glyphosate in that year on soybean. And then what you have here in the top right corner, the R value, that's the correlation factor. The R value is 0.99 if basically it's obvious that the two go together. 0.95 is high, 0.98, etc. So you can see that. And so she did that for many, many diseases, that the statistics that she could get from the US Center for Disease Control. So the correlation analysis basically tell you that glyphosate and liver kidney cancer are very highly correlated. Bladder cancer, even higher. Pancreatic cancer, 0.92. Thyroid cancer, 0.99. These are incredibly high R values. And then she looked also at autism, 0.99. Alzheimer, 0.99. Celiac, 0.98. And you can read the list, the rest of the list here by yourself. Diabetes, obesity, intestinal infection, liver and kidney failure. So these are their results. And these obviously, like I said, she was in hiding. I don't know if she still is. But obviously that upset definitely Monsanto and the EPA and yeah. Okay, I'm going to finish quickly here with a last category, which I haven't talked about, but in 1950, at the top of the page here, it was discovered as a synthetic amino acid, and this is really interesting because it has consequences for your health. If you remember the 20 amino acids that are making the proteins of your body, the smallest one is called glycine, and it has only 2 carbons. And glycine is a very common amino acid. It's very small, of course. And like all amino acid, it has a nitrogen at one arm and then a carboxylic acid residue at the other arm. and this is the two arms of any amino acid. We know about 500 of them, and this is how they link up to make protein. The 20 amino acids that make life, this is how they're joined to make protein. And I've just turned the molecule of glycine here upside down to show you how it is here in drawn in black. And then there's glycine, and then there's a methyl, a CH3, but it's CH2 here, and then there's a phosphonic acid. And glycine is basically glycine methyl phosphonate, glyphosate, an amino acid analog. It's basically glyphosate with a tail. And I was in correspondence with Anthony Samzel, who I've shown several of his publications recently, just a few minutes ago. And basically, he obtained 10,000 pages of Monsanto's studies, results studies, through some difficult work with his senator, or I forget exactly how it was done. But anyway, what he showed, he sent me this email, and basically what he showed is that Monsanto knows very well that glyphosate accumulates in the proteins, because here they did this work with radioactive carbon glyphosate, and you could see that there was a lot of it incorporated into the proteins of the fish. And then he sent me this email here. Glyphosate becomes part of the proteins of all milk, whether you're a cow, a goat, a human, a chimpanzee. And this was because basically there was a group of women in the US who got really interested to see if there was glyphosate in their milk, if that's what they were feeding their babies, their newborns. And they were horrified to find that most of them had glyphosate in their milk. To which the Monsanto and the EPA basically said, you know, these are really, really low levels, really. I mean, nothing should happen. We are way below the minimum residue limits and acceptable daily intake, and that should not really happen. And plus, Monsanto also quickly had a study done within the following year by their staff, and they sampled many women, and they basically couldn't find any glyphosate in the milk. So that was the end of that story. And so Anthony Samzel and Stephanie Senev also published this study, and I'm going to have you read the abstract. It was too small in the previous page. So we're going to read this together because this is a really interesting study. I mean, it's not a study, it's just basically they're expressing the possibility and the probability that there is glyphosate in our bodies. There was a survey done in California a few years back, and they sampled 1,000 people or so to see if they had glyphosate in their pee, in their organs, in their whatever, and they found that 93% of people had glyphosate in their body. In Germany, they did the same survey with several thousand people, and they found that 99% of people had glyphosate in their body. So glyphosate as a glycine analog, glycine with a tail, can be incorporated into the proteins. And that explains this. And I'm going to give you a minute to read this page. And this is from Germany, and they also looked at residues of glyphosate in animal, cattle, and other animals, and humans, and all their organs. And they found that glyphosate is in all the organs measured: muscles, bones, lungs, liver, spleen. Now, we're coming to the end here, to a few more minutes. There are tolerance levels for any chemical. Some of them are very low levels. Some of them, like arsenic in your food, and lead, and all kinds of things. And it's the same thing with all the pesticides. So obviously there are tolerance levels for glyphosate. And you can see here the table of the levels in 1993. This is before, in 1993, this is before the GMOs. And then you go 1999, and then this is after the GMOs, and then you go 2015, 2012, and even 2015. There's a little bit of refinement here. And you can tell the difference between 1993 and 2015. And I guess what I want you to notice here, and the last column on the right is the increase in MRL, basically for soybean, between 93 and 2015, the tolerance level that you're told that is okay to have has doubled. If you go for corn, it has been multiplied by 50. Between 93 and 2015, you can ingest 50 times more glyphosate and it's okay. And with oat, it's 300 times. With wheat, it's 300 times, etc. And it's the same chemical. So you can see that Monsanto, the EPA, can set up whatever numbers they want as a maximum residue limit in your food, and it's okay because the farming community requires it. It's the most popular herbicide. It's incredibly successful, and it obviously generates huge amount of money. So this is my last slide. So you are animals and you need to eat. And my whole hour here was spent explaining to you that whatever is raised, animals fed wheat or corn or soy or canola, which is basically all the animals, or prepared with all the prepared food that you can buy in the store, is contaminated. And with wheat and corn, it's extremely contaminated, particularly wheat. Oat, rye, barley, extremely contaminated because they're sprayed just before harvest. Canola is a GMO, and it's the cheap oil, and it is contaminated. Sugar. And then peas, beans, lentils, chickpeas, peanuts, sunflowers, flax, any seed are also sprayed with Roundup just before harvest. So what's left basically is anything organic, and basically fruits and vegetables, which by definition cannot be sprayed, because you don't, if you spray a plant, you kill it. So you don't spray apple trees, you don't spray melons, you don't spray carrots, you don't spray vegetables, because otherwise you're going to kill them. You can use glyphosate as a herbicide a few weeks, a few months before, to kill the weeds before you plant. But you cannot spray the mature crop like you spray GMO corn, soy, or canola, and etc.
In the European Union, they were looking seriously at withdrawing the license from glyphosate.
Mm-hmm.
They decided not to, but the French government, and I believe the Belgian government, says they're going to persist anyway with their own. So there you've got a whole government thinks it's dangerous enough to merit withdrawing a license to use it. Does that have merit as an approach?
Yes, you know, the reason why I'm public about it is because I'm really concerned about the food contamination.
Yes.
So obviously the next move is to regulate the hell out of this chemical and ban it to be used on food crops, for God's sake.
Yes.
It shouldn't be done.
Right.
To use it as a herbicide when it's such a good herbicide, probably no more toxic than many others, maybe. So that's my position. But I can't imagine a Minister of Agriculture deciding from one day to the next, sorry, to the farming community, you can't use this chemical anymore. They are going to go crazy. They are completely addicted.
So when
And this is my last slide, which I did show when I spoke to you in 2018 in Chicago.
Well, thank you so much. That is so totally terrifying. Okay. Uh, I really appreciate your talking about this. So there were some questions that came up. Tim Sonder answered some of them along the way, but I'm going to ask them in any case. So how long does glyphosate remain in the soil after application? And and what's the impact of that, I would say?
It depends on the soil. And there were studies done that showed, I mean, Monsanto, of course, was quick to show that, it doesn't stay in the soil, for God's sake, of course not. And it doesn't go into the water either. So anything between a few weeks and a few months, you would lose most of it. I think I remember seeing a long time ago studies from Sweden where they found it a year later or something like that. But, a few weeks to a few months.
Right, right.
I definitely would not use it in my garden.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
anywhere near me, really.
Right. When this is not in the chat, but also so what would it take for a commercial agriculture to wean a field off of Roundup? What's the duration of that? I mean, how do they even, what's the is it just not even happening, so there's not even really tests of that, studies of that?
I don't know. I don't know studies of that.
Yeah.
I would imagine if you were a farmer and you wanted to go turkey and not use it anymore, I think you'd be okay next year. They'd be like, negligible. The problem is not spraying the field and it's in the soil. The problem is in the food.
Okay. I mean, the thing I had heard is that there are aggressive weeds like amaranth and things like that that really kind of overwhelm, and so that makes it very hard to wean yourself off of that. You get into this spiral of reliance on it.
The farming community, Ministry of Agriculture everywhere are very clear that we cannot farm without it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, of course, there's lots of toxicity studies and there's lots of clues and sorry, we cannot farm without it.
Right. There was a question, well, can the amount of glyphosate in the air around Chicago be tested because there are many farms surrounding Chicago that use glyphosate? Tim said the drift might not be too bad from that, but does it get airborne like dicamba does, or?
It is airborne, like everything else, yes, for sure. Like where it's particularly heavily used, it's in the rainwater, it's in the rain, it's yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
It is, in large farms, it is sprayed by plane.
Right. And can water treatment plants remove any of it or no? Right. That's what I assume too. Yeah. Okay. According to the results of this research, it now makes sense why breast and colorectal cancer rates are increasing in young adults. Yeah. Just late last year, a journal retracted a study paper because it was written by Monsanto researchers who did not reveal their connection, and the study was about it being safe for human consumption. So, yeah. And then one person asked, so what can we eat? I think you were answering that. It's basically organic foods, non-GMO. I guess if you could eat non-GMO, non-organic, tell me.
There's something about what I used to say in my talks. It's like you could have a big loaf of bread with a big sticker on it, no GMOs, but the wheat has been sprayed just before harvest.
Right, right.
Huge residues. The beer industry had to learn not to use barley that had been sprayed because
Right.
it kills, the yeast. The oats in all the kids, what do you call them?
Cereals?
Breakfast cereals, thank you. The oats are heavily contaminated.
Yeah, yeah,
Kids are, really paying for it.
yeah. So you said fruits and vegetables and yeah.
Vegetables will have limited residues because
Mhm.
it's used as a herbicide a few weeks to a few months before. Maybe it's in drifting in the rain or in the water, etc., etc. But basically, if you go organic and you drop prepared foods from the store, then you have limited intake.
Yeah. Well, I so appreciate your coming here, and I'm sorry that we rushed you through your talk. We have to have you uh, come back more often. Yeah, you're so fast. We really appreciate your talking with us about this. I think that's the end of our questions. I think it's just everyone is kind of sobered and quiet about all this. So, thank you very, very much for your time and coming to talk to us. Yeah.
Thank you.
Night night.